Hey, it's Matthew Cudmore, and welcome to Story Behind the Stone. Today, we're joined by Jim Landon of ATCO Frontec. Jim served in the British Army for 28 years and today serves as a leader in the world of defense. In today's episode, we talk about the lessons learned across international operations, the realities of veterans transition, and why remembrance and readiness matter in a rapidly changing world. Jim, thanks for sharing your experience and for the work you're doing to support veterans and those who continue to serve. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in.
Welcome to Story Behind the Stone, where we talk service, sacrifice, and story, bringing you the most interesting people in veteran causes and commemoration. My name is Ryan Mullins. I'm with Memory Anchor, a company dedicated to changing the way the world remembers while using technology for good. Today, I am so happy to be joined here on site in person, which is always a treat, with Jim Landon with ATCO Frontec. Jim, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today.
Really happy to join you and hope this will be fun. I'm sure it will be.
ATCO Frontec and ATCO is very active in the military community. But further to that too, is you have an interesting military history as well in your past, which, lends to what you do as well today. But you have some interesting perspectives on that. And so I'm hoping we can cover a couple of these topics as we go through. But I think first, the best place to start is maybe for our listeners who aren't familiar with ATCO and ATCO Frontec. What are you as a business?
ATCO is a global company, sort of 7,000 or so employees directly employed, and a large amount of that is here in Canada. But we operate in the US and in South America, Australia, and Europe. A large bit of ATCO is the utility business, which a lot of people here in Canada would be very familiar with, and the structures business, which is the ATCO trailers that you see all over the place with the yellow stripe around the top and so on. And that's the original business of ATCO. But ATCO Frontec is the business unit within ATCO that delivers services. So we're all about people delivering services to people. And we specialize in supporting government and defense and then commercial clients so that they can sort of focus on whatever their key mission is. So that might be anything from operating right up in the Arctic, which we do with Inuit partners, to operate and maintain the North Warning System for NORAD, through to looking after airfields for the Canadian Air Force, through to looking after barracks buildings here in Alberta for the D&D. And then we also operate for NATO over in Europe and for the US military down in the US. And then also we do services in workforce housing camps. So the camp services part of the business is a very important part of it. Almost any major project that you do in Canada is going to be remote by definition. And so it needs a workforce housing camp for the workforce to live in. And we do everything from cooking the meals to cleaning the rooms to booking people in and out to looking after the buildings. So it's all about services. And it's for that mixture of government and defense and commercial clients.
The staff that I've seen and always engage with at ATCO, you really see that coming through. Is they're people and they're engaging with people, and I think that's a culture that is going throughout, and it informs a lot of the work you guys do here.
Yeah, I think, we very much care about people. This company has a real culture of long service. There are an awful lot of people here who serve 5, 10, 15 to 20, 30 years. It's sort of a thing that is rather in common with the military, to be honest. And there's also an awful lot of families. People always said to me when I joined ATCO, oh, ATCO is a real family company. And I must admit, at first I thought they were just talking about the Southern family who own it. And then after a while, I realized that's not really what they meant. What they really meant was that there are a lot of families within ATCO. So you'll find brothers, sisters, fathers, sons, mothers, daughters, cousins working across this company. And I think that's actually a very interesting thing. If you're prepared to recommend this company to your spouse, to your brother, sister, or whatever as a good place to work, that says something about the company and about the culture.
That kind of drive to serve and then goes through generations. And in that, it's kind of funny that parallel comes in because part of obviously what we talk a lot about is service from a military perspective, but there is a lot of service that ATCO's doing as well. And we were talking a little bit before the show about some of your involvement with Invictus Games and stuff like that. So ATCO takes a pretty active stance in the military and veteran community, don't they?
They do, absolutely. And I mean, in fact, it's how I came to join ATCO after I left the military, was that I had met them whilst I was still in uniform at Spruce Meadows as part of this sort of joining up, if you like, that happens at Spruce Meadows, where the Canadian military and the British military play quite a sort of central part in the Masters tournament in September, and are there to celebrate and provide some of the pageantry, if you like, for the events that go on, but are also being very much celebrated. ATCO holds a Military Families Appreciation Day at Spruce Meadows as well, and so on. So I think there has always been a close bond here. Where we're situated here in ATCO Park in Calgary is where RCAF Calgary was as well, and this was part of the effort of training pilots during the Second World War, which many Canadians will be familiar with. And the site of the ATCO Park head office now is where the fire station was here. At the fire hall, and in the fire hall worked one Mr. Southern as a firefighter in the Canadian Air Force. When he left, his discharge money from the Air Force was half of the capital required to found ATCO. The other half came from his son, Ron Southern, who'd been working as a busboy in the Banff Springs Hotel. And they put the money together, and that was the seed capital to begin ATCO. Our roots go back absolutely into service and into that history in the Second World War.
I think that's actually really phenomenal. And when you think it's, 80 plus years on now, and ATCO is still out there living this heritage that found it, living the values and the roots. And I think that is something that is so special, because for a company to continue to living the values and culture to this day from back then is phenomenal. And so you're seeing that out in Spruce Meadows, out and how you participating in the Invictus game. And then someone like yourself who's had a lot of service, it's no wonder that you were pulled into this, because it kind of fits into your history. And Jim, maybe you want to share a little bit about your background and what brought you here into the work you do today.
Yeah, certainly. So I was 28 years in the British Army, an infantry officer. I joined, went to Sandhurst when the Berlin Wall was still standing. I am, in fact, that old. And then the Berlin Wall came down actually whilst I was at Sandhurst, and I thought, oh, what are we going to do now? One of those moments when you realise that sort of the world is changing. And then by the time I was passing out from Sandhurst, Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait. And we were off into a new world of being busy. And the British Army was then as busy, I think, as it has ever been in its history throughout my time. I found myself on operations around the world, from Northern Ireland to Bosnia to Kosovo to Sierra Leone to Iraq and Afghanistan, during the course of my career. And then towards the end of my career, I was very lucky to get the chance to come to Canada again. I'd been here a couple of times in the past, to the British Army Training Unit at Suffield here in Alberta, what was at that time the largest live fire manoeuvre training centre that the British Army had access to anywhere in the world. So I came to take over the command of that in 2012, thinking we'd be here a couple of years and then sort of go back to the UK and carry on with my career and so on. Within a year, my wife, who'd never been to North America, said, right, that's it. You're getting out. We're staying here in Canada. And so we sort of started that process and went through the permanent residency and so on process. And as I say, during that time, I'd also met ATCO and sort of developed a little bit of a network here in Calgary and so on. But I went back to Afghanistan for one last tour in 2016. And then left and joined ATCO in 2017. So I think it was I had a very interesting career. I went to lots of different places, saw lots of different things. And I think, by the time I got to the end of my career, I was ready to leave and do something else. So the opportunity with ATCO was really excellent for me.
We were talking a little earlier just about kind of the veteran experience, and ATCO is very active with supporting active military reservists and also veterans. When you think of your own personal experience, or when you think of veterans coming into the workplace, what's the important thing that comes along with those vets?
I think bringing veterans in is they have an awful lot to offer. And I think anybody who's been in a leadership position in the military, any branch, any nationality and so on, they've learned how to plan, they've learned how to project manage as well, and they've learned to build a team, to care about the individuals in the team. and to bring those teams together to deliver mission success. So they know how to do that. Well, that's incredibly transferable because certainly here in ATCO Frontec, that's what we do all the time. Every time we mobilize a new project, we put in a bunch of people. Some of them may know each other before they get there. In most cases, they won't. And a leader has to come in, build them into a team, get to know them all as individuals, get them to understand what they should be doing, and then get them to deliver that service that the client is paying for. So I think it's incredibly sort of common things that we do. And it also, I mean, certainly with the workforce housing camps, if you've been in the military, whether you've seen a civilian workforce housing camp or not, you've kind of lived in one somewhere because they're so similar. A little bit more luxurious, I must say, on the civilian side than on the military side, in most cases. But that sort of business of being able to set something like that up and operate it in a very austere location in the middle of nowhere, that's something that is very common to the military experience. So I think, that's something that veterans bring. The other thing that veterans bring, especially those who've served, I think, in the last sort of period when they were in Afghanistan or Iraq or Bosnia or anywhere like that, really, is you had to learn to live and work in a culture other than your own. There's a different set of skills to doing that and an attitude of mind, I think, that you have to go there and learn about that culture and learn about what is normal and how they work together and how they operate and so on in order to be effective. Anyone who worked as an advisor in Afghanistan would have lived this in spades. I think I often felt when I was sat with my Afghan generals that they were playing three-dimensional Game of Thrones chess, and I was sort of struggling to keep up with it. Um, but I think, where we operate internationally, so this is very applicable there. But also, I'm an immigrant to Canada, and I've had to learn about Canadian culture, and it's not massively different to British culture, but there are significant differences. But I've also had to learn about the history of Indigenous peoples, and the situation where they find themselves in now and in the future, because a lot of our business is with Indigenous partners. And so I think, again, transferable skills, if you come with an attitude of mind that you're going to learn about this and have respect for other people's cultures and be interested, then that goes a long way in building the relationships that are so important for business.
The word that's coming to mind for me is agility. Something I think the military really taught me was it's almost a perspective that you cultivate is that you're not attached to outcome because what drives the outcome a lot of time is the situation and that you're agile. You know where you're going. We're going to complete this mission, but how we complete it might change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the other thing that I would say is really important, the other two sort of characteristics, if you like, one is humility. When you go through transition from the military, you can be confident about what you've done in the past and what you've learned, but you've got to translate that into a language that people will understand. But you've also got to be humble about what you don't know. And there will be things you don't know. And I know, a lot of veterans will say, oh, I was responsible for millions of dollars of equipment and the lives of people. And yeah, absolutely you were. But you weren't running a profit and loss account. That's different. You were looking after things. You were spending money very often, probably quite large budgets in some cases, but you weren't trying to make money. And that's different. And so I think, when I made that transition, I tried to be as open as possible with people about what I didn't understand. And I was very lucky to have some excellent people in my team who, well, they might have thought I was a complete idiot, but they were polite enough not to say so. Um, but would explain to me things in words of not too many syllables so that I could learn those commercial concepts that I didn't understand. So I think it's really important to be humble about what you don't know. And then coupled to that is an attitude of lifelong learning, which I've always been very keen on, which is that, you're never done learning. What does it say in the army? Every day is a school day. It's so true. I think if you go through a day and you haven't learnt anything new, then it's not a wasted day, but you haven't done it to the full extent. I always try to make sure I'm learning something new all the time. And so I think taking an attitude of, I've got things to learn and I'm going to put the effort in to learn them. That's, I think, really important.
And that word humility comes up again in that because I think that the day you think you figured it out, you're in trouble,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
So you have to have that humility to recognize that learning's ongoing. We always say there's transferable skills from the army to, and yes, there are, but it's the same but different. And you have to have that humility to recognize it's like, yeah, you can apply some of these things, but it is different. So you have to learn.
Absolutely. And I think also I would just say, as a health warning, I'm talking about my job, my team, my business that I'm working and what I've learned. I'm not saying that's applicable to every single business or, or every
Mhm.
single person. Everybody will come with their own different sets of experiences and so on, and then go into a business where you've got to learn different things. What I've found helpful is that the military is basically, especially in the infantry end of it, it's all about people
Mhm.
and teams coming together to deliver an outcome. And so that basic knowledge of how to build a team and how to care about individuals so they feel part of a team, that is ingrained, I think, in most leaders in the military. And in the people business that I'm in, it's equally applicable. So I think that's, the common thread that I found to be very helpful.
Coming back to that people serving people again, you can see how that was a really good culture fit for ATCO. Right. Hence why I think there's a lot of activity continuing to going on at ATCO where you're doing things like supporting Invictus or other things like that.
Yeah, so we didn't have a formalized program for recruiting veterans or helping them to integrate when I joined. It was a bit of a gap, and it was something that the CEO, that Nancy Southern, wanted to address. And so we started working on that, sort of not long after I joined. In how would we tried to do that better. And I brought some veterans into ATCO Frontec, people that I knew who were a fit for certain different jobs and so on, and encouraged people to apply for jobs when I saw them sort of coming up and so on. But through becoming involved with Invictus, so we got involved with Invictus through True Patriot Love. So True Patriot Love, the charity lots of people will be familiar with, that supports Canadian veterans. We got involved through the Nicola Goddard Award to start with, I think, and then we started getting more and more sort of interested in it. And it just happened to coincide with True Patriot Love working to bring the Invictus Games to Canada. So I went to the Netherlands, to the first Invictus Games I went to when we sponsored Team Canada through True Patriot Love. And it was whilst we were in the Netherlands at the games there in The Hague that we found out the games are going to come to Vancouver Whistler. And so at that point, we started getting into a bit more of a discussion about, okay, should we play a bigger role in this? And I had one of those wonderful decision briefings with my CEO where I said, well, there's three options. There's the sort of little bit down here, there's the sort of middle one, and then there's this one, which is rather more expensive. And, which one do you want to go for? And I think her words were something like, it's go big or go home, Jim.
I love it.
So that's how we came to be a co-presenting sponsor with Boeing of the Invictus Games in Vancouver. And I then had the opportunity to be on the board for those games and to play a part in sort of shaping how they were put together. And it was an absolutely fascinating experience. I've never been involved in seeing how a major sporting event is put on, along with sort of television and media coverage and all the rest of it. There's a whole load of things I'd never seen before, and I learned a lot by
Yeah.
being a part of it. And also went out to the Invictus Games in Germany and saw those as well, because we've continued to sponsor Team Canada to all of the games, and we obviously played that big part in Invictus, and then we will continue sponsoring Team Canada and being involved in Invictus in the future. I think one of the things we decided to do, though, as a part of the Invictus effort, was to formalize how we would approach bringing veterans into ATCO and supporting them within ATCO. So we formed a Veterans Employment Resource Group, and that helped us to find the veterans that we already had, because we didn't actually know, in all honesty, how many veterans we really had, and it was more than we thought. We also took on somebody full-time in ATCO HR in the recruiting team, who is the specific point of contact for veterans. And so he runs initiatives that go out there looking for veterans and translating ATCO jobs into, how this would work for veterans and so on, and acts as that point of contact. So I think we've formalized a lot of things that we had not done before. Um, But we also, I think, through the Invictus Games in Vancouver, Whistler, we sent a lot of ATCO employees there as volunteers. A lot of people saw the games and saw the publicity surrounding them and the videos that we did and so on and so forth. And so I think it opened an awful lot of people's minds to what it means to be a veteran, what it means to have served and what Invictus does. We reached a lot of people across ATCO. And a lot of our employees who may have had nothing to do with the military themselves in their own lives were very proud of ATCO's role in the games. And so I think it's been an all-round positive for us as a result.
What piece of advice would you give another company when it comes to that veteran initiative? What would you say would be the one thing they could do that would make a difference?
I would reach out to somebody that you think's doing it well, not necessarily us. There are plenty of other companies that are doing this, because you'll find that this is not commercially sensitive or secret. People are more than willing to share their experiences. That's what we did. We spoke to CPKC Rail here in Calgary. I actually had a number of friends who had left the British military and people from the Canadian military and the US military who work in CPKC. One of their HR people who did a similar job to the one I just talked about in ATCO used to work with me at Batters. So I knew him. So I knew what he'd done. So we compared a lot of notes. So we sort of talked to each other, and the veterans, we talked to each other and say, okay, what works, what doesn't work, what do we need to try, and so on. We've been trying to do that, I think, ever since, talking to other companies when we're at events and so on, and looking at what they're doing and would that work for us and how well would that work for us and so on. So I think reach out for advice. Don't try and do it off a blank piece of paper. You don't need to.
Earlier, we were talking before we started recording, and you had brought some really interesting points because, we're talking Invictus, and we think of other organizations like Wounded Warrior and such like this. These are really, really important for bringing awareness of, some of the cost of service. Yet, we have a perception out there of what a veteran is, and sometimes that's helpful, and sometimes it's not. If you were to think of that perception, what do you think is one of the most important things when perceiving a veteran and thinking of employing in the workforce?
Invictus and a number of the other charities that work in the space do a great job in supporting those that need the support. Those that have physical injuries or that have post-traumatic stress or something similar, and they need support to get back on their feet. And I think those charities do a fabulous job of doing that. And I have heard countless success stories from people of all nations and militaries, people familiar with sort of working alongside in Afghanistan and so on, of the success stories that have come through Invictus. It's impressive, it's humbling. If you're involved in Invictus and don't end up crying quite frequently, then you're not a human, I'm telling you. So I think that is fantastic what it does. There is a slight risk that I do worry about sometimes, which is that if that is all that is seen in the public eye, then I think, the public, there is a risk that they start seeing veterans as being mad, bad, or sad. And the vast majority of veterans have served, gained an awful lot from their service, learned a lot. Yes, served their country, but they've also taken away a whole bag full of transferable skills. And most of us have an unending supply of funny stories as well, if you give us a beer or two. And they can bring an awful lot to an organization, a civilian organization, when they transition out of the military. And so I think, I worry sometimes whether we're getting the balance right. I don't want to stop support to the people that Invictus and others support. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is I think there are many more success stories that perhaps don't get the same level of publicity. And of course, there's also people who go through the Invictus process and then they become great success stories as well, and become absolute credits to the organization that they work in, benefits and assets to them. So I think, I wouldn't want people to go away with the impression that we all need help. And actually, when you look into the veteran charity world as well, an awful lot of the work that's being done and the effort that's being done to support veterans is being done by other veterans. And so we are a really good community at supporting each other, which is, I think, really important. And that goes on at all kinds of scales. We see the big organizations in the media and so on, but I was back in the UK recently and went to a reunion for my own regiment from people who served in the Balkans together. And The vast majority of stories that I was listening to from people where they had had help just networking into a job or something, or they'd had actual help with something where they had a problem. Most of the times they were telling me they'd had it either from a mate, another veteran, or they'd had it from the regiment.
Yeah.
And it's small scale charity. So there's an awful lot of work goes on, I think, all the time to support each other. We are a great network for that.
Those are really valid points. There's an emotional connection when you see some of the sacrifices that people have physically and mentally done on the battlefield. And the other side of that is those individuals that may not be carrying any of those or have healed from those and have a lot to offer.
One of the great things I still love about veterans, and this is international as well, is we have fabulous black humor. I was at the Invictus Games at one of the medal ceremonies, and I was presenting medals to two Americans and a Polish guy who had been on the skeleton bomb. I did it during the 1 year to go celebration. It is a truly terrifying and fabulous experience. We were stood there as I'm about to go on the stage, and one of the Americans goes, "Look at us! We got 2.5 legs between us." And I was sort of going on the stage laughing. Yeah, and it's the sort of thing that only a veteran amputee could say to a bunch of other veteran amputees, and everyone think it was funny.
The dark humor is a beautiful coping in a way,
Yeah.
right? That shows to me is actually just the immense resiliency and courage and just still finding joy in life. Like you said, I think when it comes to the veteran employment and being a veteran employer, there's so many different benefits, and I think encouraging different employers to look into that is great.
I think that actually it is one of the quieter but very effective parts of the Invictus movement, funnily enough, is the networking of companies together that are wanting to be veteran-friendly employers. I mentioned earlier, if you were going to try and learn how to do this and sort of link up with others who've done it, Invictus actually enables that. And it runs workshops and forums and networks and so on as part of the games and so on happening in the background, where employers get together and share best practice with each other. So I think there is definitely a movement in that area. And one of the things I really noticed with Invictus as well is it tends to bring in the ministers and the senior officers and so on from the countries, and they come together. There's a whole medical symposium thing goes on in the week before the games and so on. There's a whole load of stuff that happens, which is not just the games, but which is about making the veteran experience better.
And that's, I think, the value of coming together across country and, disciplines and everything. Everybody just coming in together.
I think we've all watched the Americans do this much better than most of us for a long time.
They do it
I
well.
think, as a Brit, I would look across at how the respect given to US veterans and the support given to them and so on, and think, oh God, we're not very good at doing this in the UK. And then when I became a Canadian, I looked and thought, oh, we're not brilliant at doing it here either, But then through Invictus, I watched this sort of spreading of ideas and the kind of joining up of, okay, how do you guys do that? And it is different, and there are different amounts of money. And I remember, this you could bring tears to your eyes. I remember being in The Hague, and I was staying in the same hotel as the American team, and the American team, financially very well supported, fabulous wheelchairs, prosthetics, service dogs everywhere, and so on. Fantastic. The Iraqi team was there. 5 guys, and they were sort of sharing wheelchairs almost. I mean, it was so bad. And you think, wow, and that is one of the things that Invictus is trying to do, is trying to spread out into other countries around the world now. Because obviously it started off as just the true contributing nations for Afghanistan, but is now spread much wider. And part of that is getting the message out there about how you treat your veterans, how you support your veterans, and so on. So I think we're all getting better, but there's definitely a spectrum, according to which country you're from, as to how good that looks.
Matt and I went down to the opening ceremonies of Invictus, and that's something, you said there that really captured. You look at how the Americans have done it historically, and they're really good at it. Going down to the games and seeing what ATCO and all the partners in Invictus put on there, it gave me chills. I was blown away when those soldiers started coming in from the different countries and the Ukrainian soldiers came in, and definitely felt a mark of pride that I haven't felt in a long time watching that.
I think Canada did a fantastic job
We did.
with the Invictus Games. When I was stood there at the opening ceremonies, I was looking outside the stadium as people were coming in. There were 40 odd thousand people in that stadium. I suspect about 5 to 10,000 were coming because it was the Invictus Games and they knew about veterans and they wanted to be there for that. And there were about 30,000 who were there to see the music acts. But there were 30,000 people who left with an education about what Invictus was, what it is to be a veteran. One of the things we did really well was the stories that they kept putting up in between different acts and so on of individual veterans and their lives and what they'd done and so on and so forth. And it just brought the whole thing it brought a human size, to the whole thing. In between Katy Perry strutting her stuff and Noah Khan, who I didn't know who that was until my kids told
He's
me,
good.
and now I'm a fan.
Yeah.
So I think we did a really good thing there about getting the message out.
There was just poignant moments, and I just can't help bringing this one up, but the bagpiper, that piece was probably one of the peak moments to hear him play.
Yeah, I met him in Germany actually. And, those of us who served in Iraq and Afghanistan we familiar and Bosnia as well. It was the first ramp ceremony I ever did. The ramp ceremony is difficult to understand or explain to civilians, but, the soldiers who are the mates of the people who have died won't be at the funeral because they can't
That's
be
right.
because they're still on the operation. So for the mates of the people who've been killed, the funeral is the ramp ceremony. The ramp ceremony is the funeral. That's it. That's all there's going to be. And so it's important that it's done really, really well. And it does look very much like a funeral. Everyone is on parade. But the difference is you're not stood in some leafy green cemetery somewhere. You're stood on an airfield. And the fight is still going on around you. Jets are taking off, helicopters are coming in and out. So there is all the noise that's still going on. We try and quieten it down for ramp ceremonies, but you can't entirely. And then, there is a burial party. There are flag draped coffins. They are loaded into the back of the aircraft. And the aircraft door closes in the same way that you would see at a cremation and a funeral, if you like. The whole ceremony is designed to serve as a funeral, but the bagpiper playing is, last post, and then, a lament from the bagpipes is such a military thing that it takes everyone back there. And so, yes, you say the bagpiper, in that case, the corporal who had played all those ramp ceremonies, because of course there aren't that many bagpipers normally in theatre. So whoever's there ends up doing a lot of ramp ceremonies as he did. And, not just for Canadians, but for anybody and everybody, because you're all in it together. Nationality doesn't matter. And that's the other thing, is that all nationalities all turn out at ramp ceremonies, whether it's your soldiers or not. You're there representing because you're all in the fight together. And so he played a lot, and then he couldn't play again. He couldn't bring himself to pick up the bagpipes when he returned to Canada. And he played for the first time in Germany for Harry when he visited Canada House as part of the sort of look forward to the games. And then Harry told that story in the closing ceremony in Germany, and then that was that beautiful link into the opening ceremony in Canada, was that he retold the story. And then God is so brave. I mean, 40,000 seater stadium, and he was stood right in the middle of it on his own playing the pipes. And then the most enormous bagpipe band. I've heard more bagpipes in Canada than I ever heard in the UK. I have to say, pound for pound, there are definitely more bagpipes in Canada. But they all came in, and what I loved about it was, I think if we'd done it in the UK, they would have all been military bands, but that's not how we do it in Canada. Everyone was a part of it. It was a truly massed Canadian effort. It was fantastic.
What do you feel the importance of commemoration or remembrance is?
I think it is really important, and especially now, I think that as I get older, I think the first remembrance days that I would have remembered from being at school and so on, it was abstract. You were thinking about masses of soldiers, service personnel that had died in the First and Second World Wars and so on. You weren't necessarily thinking about any individual person because it's just too big to get your head around, kind of thing, and you didn't necessarily have that connection in the same way. And then I think as I've got older, and unfortunately the list of people that I have personally known who've been mates, who've been soldiers under command, soldiers in the same unit and so on, that have died on operations that I've been on, that's who I think about when I'm stood there now at remembrance parades. You remember those who are not there with you, those who, for them, the clock stopped. And I think that's, it makes it much more personal. And it's much more focused on, the time of my own service and so on. I still think about, the the fact that we're able to stand there is due to the efforts of those who've gone before us. There's some painting somewhere, that show veterans. There's certainly a British one that show veterans from sort of First, Second World War, right through all of the wars in Korea and in Northern Ireland and Iraq and Afghanistan and so on, all in a bar together, all in their different uniforms from the different periods. A bit of a Valhalla type photo, a picture, if you like. And I tend to think of it a little bit like that. That is where people have gone, kind of thing. So I think it is important that we remember. The other thing I would say is that now so few people serve. Even in the United States, where service, there are far bigger armed forces, it's still a tiny percentage of the total population. So the linkage to knowing somebody that has served just isn't there. Not there in the UK. It's not really here in Canada. For those of us that have served, we're not even necessarily aware of it because we all know each other, and we move in veteran circles and so on. So to us, it's of course everyone veterans sort of thing, but actually the vast majority of people don't. And so I think it is important that we keep on educating, that we keep on talking about it. I'm involved in some of the educational programs here through the Military Museums Foundation because I think it's important that we do keep talking about it, that, this didn't happen by accident. The history not repeating itself but rhyming. I talked about, when I joined the Army in 1989, the world changed and it was all a bit, oh, what's next kind of thing. It feels a bit like that right now to me. We've gone through this sort of post-war period of spending the peace dividend, post-Cold War period, spending the peace dividend like crazy. But now suddenly we've realized, oh, it's not all peace and light. And the economic activity and democracy were not going to just happen in China and Russia and so on, just by magic. And actually, there are people who want what we have and will take it from us by force if they have to. It feels like one of those moments in history where people are, oh. And I think the next step after that is to realize that if you're going to need bigger armed forces, that's going to need more people to serve. It's going to need more sacrifice in terms of money you spend on tanks. You can't spend on hospitals or dental care or something. So I think we are still, as a country, coming to terms with what that means. And having a sense of history and understanding how we got to where we are is important when we think about where we've got to go next.
One of the biggest parts of our identity is based in those history and those who have served, and to hold that in a reverent place is important. Because if you're a young person and you're thinking of joining, you're joining a history, a lineage of people who serve for value, for purpose, and we have to remember that.
Absolutely. And I think certainly, when you talk about it, and if I talk about it as an infantry officer who belonged to our regiment, we were all very conscious of our regimental history in every infantry regiment. I'm sure in many other regiments, they could tell you about where their regiment's history, where they had served, what they had done, and what happened at various battles and so on and so forth. And that was very much a part of who we were, because you were conscious that you were standing on the shoulders of those who'd gone before you, and you needed to live up to that reputation. And it's a very important part of it. And it's really interesting how quickly history sort of goes into the past. I look now at pictures of young fusiliers or troopers or gunners, certainly in the British military, and you can tell if you're a veteran, you can read people's medals and know where they've been and what they've done. So there was a period when I was serving when we all joked we looked like Chelsea pensioners because we all ended up with great racks of medals because we kept getting sent places because that's what it was like in that period. But now it stopped. We've come to the end of Iraq and the end of Afghanistan. There's not many people in Syria. There's not many big operations going on around the world. So suddenly you look at the younger soldiers and there's sort of, there might be a sort of Jubilee medal or something, and that's about it. And it's really interesting how quickly that happens, how quickly that accumulated, service experience, time moves on and we get older and we leave and we go and do something else, and then the next generation comes along.
Like you said, history will rhyme, and I think we need a population that's willing to be on guard.
Absolutely. And I think people are waking up to it. They are feeling the threat. I think the sort of more recent polls are showing strong support for greater defense spending here in Canada, and I think that's overdue. And it's now a bit of a race to see how fast we can build up the capabilities that we've let sit on the side for too long.
What's next? When you think of ATCO Frontec and what you're doing yourself here, what's the future look like?
I think I've been with ATCO about eight years now, and I'm very proud of the fact that joined a company and stayed with the company. A lot of veterans I know, when they leave, they do a year or two and then they decide it's not quite a fit for them and they move on. I feel very, very fortunate that I got a real values match between what I felt was important and how I wanted to work and so on, and the company I joined. I have a boss who very much believes in mission command, and so I have great freedom to deliver, but a responsibility to deliver as well. And I welcome that. So I really enjoy my job. There's never a dull day. There's always something interesting coming up. We are spread geographically here in Canada, coast to coast to coast. We have operations as far north as Canadian Forces Station Alert, last stop before you end up meeting Santa, right the way down to the Labrador coast and across into BC, and then down to Texas in the US, and across to the Balkans and Hungary in Europe. And we've always got new things that are coming up and new opportunities to bid upon and new jobs to do and so on. Because we're largely a project-based company. We start projects and they run for a few years and then they stop, and so we're constantly refilling that funnel of projects, if you like. Which means that there's always something new to look at, always new problems to solve, always new challenges to take on, and it's just fantastically good fun. And I have a fabulous team of people that I'm lucky enough to work with. So I think I shall be doing this for a while yet and really enjoying it. I'm very proud of the fact that ATCO has come along a little bit of a journey on getting to be more veteran friendly. We've still got more work to do. We've got the Invictus Games coming up in 2027 in the UK that we'll be involved with. We've got some other initiatives that we're doing with Invictus. We're going to be doing some Invictus awards in the future, which I think will be really good for things that are happening between the games, if you like. We've got a lot to look forward to. And right now as well, I would say here in Canada that there is a sort of Venn diagram of political geostrategic interest going on, which is infrastructure projects, whether they be pipelines or mines or building things or whatever it is, the focus on the Arctic and increased defense spending. And we Frontec sit in the middle of that Venn diagram because we support all of those things. So for us, I think it's going to be a very busy few years. We're absolutely ready to play our part in it.
I really appreciated you taking the time to talk to us and just listening to your story and your perspective and what does it mean to be a veteran. And I remember when I left the military, I had said to one of my buddies who was still in, just feeling like I wasn't serving, but he knew what I was doing with commemorating. He says, "Brian, what are you talking about? You're still serving." And so when I sit here listening to you talk, I so appreciate how you've evolved your service. You're not in the military anymore, but you've evolved that service to look like something different.
You can't serve forever. None of us can. You've all got to leave at some point. And I always encourage people who are serving to think about, when is that day coming and how prepared are you? I worked quite hard over a number of years to make sure I was going to be ready for the day when I left, because I didn't kind of want to get caught hopping at that moment, and so I thought about it quite a lot. But it's still difficult to summarize, who you are and what it is you want to do and get that elevator pitch right and the resumes and all that jazz. It's not easy. Then, as I say, I felt very happy here because I'm involved in a company that still provides support to defense. We keep those North Warning System radars turning. We, help to look after the people in alert. We, support the Air Force. So we do all sorts of things for the military. So we're still involved in supporting operations. We will be involved in future support to operations elsewhere. We're still supporting NATO over in Europe and so on. So we're still very much part of the effort. But we're also doing wider things. We do a certain amount of disaster response as well. We do it down in the States. We were there after the hurricanes hit in North and South Carolina last year, supporting the National Guard to support the recovery effort. So it feels like we're doing things that matter. And also, I think those projects of national importance, whether it be pipelines or hydro dams or potash mines in Saskatchewan or whatever it is, all of these things are important to the economy. If we can't get the economy going and working, we can't get people employed and we can't look after the country as a whole. So I think it all contributes, and it's great to be a part of it.
One thing you said right at the beginning, I don't know if it's an ATCO slogan or not, but it's sticking with me. It's people serving people.
It's an ATCO Frontec slogan in a way, kind of thing. Yeah, that is what we do. And I think it's very important for us to remember that, because people need to be well led. And, people love to be well led. And people always say they don't leave jobs, they leave bad leaders and so on. So we put quite a bit of effort into training our leaders, into leadership culture, into how we work as an organization. Because we want people to be a part of the team. We want them to feel welcome, to feel valued, and to stay with us.
Jim, this has been a really interesting podcast. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I really want to thank you again for taking your time with us today.
Great pleasure. Enjoyed talking to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Story Behind the Stone is available on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on the Wreaths Across America radio network, on iHeartRadio, Audacity, and TuneIn. Just search for Wreath. Thank you for tuning in.